Right, good afternoon. You guys all ready to go? Yes. Apologies for the short notice and the late hour of the update, but there are a couple of developments that I'm keen to update the Victorian community on with regard to the ongoing management of COVID here in Victoria. As at this morning, as the Minister already confirmed, 0 new cases overnight in the last 24 hours, 2 active community cases remaining, only 8 primary close contacts. However, I'm afraid we do have to report 2 separate further incursions of COVID from New South Wales. So just keen to provide an initial update on that and happy to take any questions. The first of these incursions is the Removalist that was mentioned briefly by the Minister this morning. So the information we have at this point in time is that a Removalist crew of 3 individuals arrived in Melbourne on the 8th of July from Sydney. They delivered 1 set of furniture to an address in the city of Whittlesea, then did a collection in Maribyrnong, and then left to go to Adelaide, arriving in Adelaide early on the 9th of July. One of the members of the crew was contacted by New South Wales Health on the 9th when they were in South Australia, identified as a primary close contact of another case. They returned to New South Wales. By the 10th he was tested, and we were informed very late last night by New South Wales Health that there was a positive case with the exposure that I've just described. My understanding is also that one of the other crew members, all 3 crew members are now in Sydney, of course, one of the other crew members may also have turned positive as well. That's information I've just had about half an hour ago. In terms of the exposure potentially here in Victoria, the first family in the city of Whittlesea, we were hoping to get hold of them late last night. They are all isolating and quarantining. They have recently relocated interstate, and quite appropriately, they've had all the right permits. They themselves tested negative on the 9th of July, so we're confident about their status to date. They've been tested again today. I'm awaiting those test results at this point in time. We'll update as and when we get those test results, but they are now in quarantine and isolation and otherwise well. The second household we have also identified. They are also being tested as we speak, and of course interviews and discussions are ongoing with them as well as with the other family. So that is the incursion with regard to the Removalist. That's the 3rd incursion of COVID we've had out of the current New South Wales cluster. The first, of course, being the Sandringham case, the second being the Virgin Atlantic air crew, both of which we've pretty much wrapped up. We now have a family of 4 who returned from Sydney. 3 of those members returned by air on the 4th of July. The 4th member returned by car on the 8th of July, all 4 living in a household in the city of Hume. They all tested negative initially, and this really highlights the importance of the red zone permit system. So all 4 members of the family travelled on appropriate red zone permits documentation. All 4 members of the family were tested shortly after their arrival, different arrival dates of course, but tested shortly after their arrival and tested negative, and they continued their isolation. 2 members of the family became symptomatic, got tested yesterday. We received their results late morning today, so they are both positive. The other 2 members of the family being tested again today, and of course we're now in the middle of conversations and discussions with that family around where they're at, any other movements they may or may not have made, and and obviously ensuring we support them for the rest of their isolation period. This latest case, so this is the 4th incursion, I'll call it the 4th incursion, really highlights the importance of the whole red zone permit system. I'm obviously pleased that we're now seeing that people who are coming in on red zone permits are isolating, but also that we're starting to get them through a structured testing process, and particularly that in this case the family didn't just wait for the first test result but continued on their 14-day isolation process. We now have, as of this morning, 8,019 active red zone permits here in Victoria, all coming out of Sydney and all the rest of New South Wales. 744 of those 8,000 in the last 24 hours. So it's a significant activity, and again, I stress to all those people returning from New South Wales on red zone permits. Again, our family from the city of Hume highlight the absolute importance of, if you're travelling back on a red zone permit, you must assume that you are positive with COVID. We create the red zone permit system and infrastructure in order to be able to return you safely to the state. It is so important that you follow the right isolation protocols, that you get tested when you return here, and that you continue to get tested during your isolation period. So at least once within the first 3 days and by day 13. If anybody travelling back on a red zone permit isn't clear what they need to do, if they need support, if they are concerned about getting food to the house, if they're concerned about anything else they need to maintain their isolation, please contact us at the Department of Health. We send out endless numbers, I'm sure, of SMS messages and phone calls. All those reaching out to the people is all about giving you support and the resources you need to do that isolation quickly on behalf of all of us as Victorians. So I'm afraid I don't have much more information than that on both two cases, but happy to take any questions at this time.
Do you know, did they stay in Melbourne overnight on July 8th? That was indication from the health minister this morning. Just trying to clarify that is correct.
This is the removalist?
This is the
Yeah,
removalist.
so look, we've got a number of conversations happening with the removalist crew at this point in time. Obviously, they're interstate. The conversations are somewhat complex and challenging. The initial versions of the stories are not quite tying up at the moment, so we're taking us a little bit longer than we would really like. We're also talking to their employer, who is providing fuel cards and logbooks and various other bits and pieces. We're expecting that information imminently. So I don't have a complete accurate track yet, Rich, in terms of exactly where they stayed. My understanding, and I have to say it's my understanding at this point in time, is that they stayed within their cab as part of their protocols. But any other locations they may have stopped at, we're still trying to track down definitively.
So the information is just forthcoming because they're not being forthcoming, or is it difficult to get information from New South Wales?
So look, New South Wales have had a series of conversations with them. Our own public health units are also, of course, in contact with them directly. So there's a lot of discussions happening. We've got 3 individuals. I think, as I said, I think the information we're getting from them is not quite as tight and robust as we would like, and that's why we've asked their employer to provide additional information. We understand they used a fuel log card for both their fuel purchases and other purchases, so we'll be keen to verify as much information as we can.
And South Australia has said they weren't wearing masks while they were working. Is that the same case for these 2 sites in Melbourne?
I don't have a confirmation of that. So again, we're getting slightly different messages from the individuals we've spoken to about exactly what they did. And let me maybe use this as a wider conversation around, we have a very, a national code in place around freight industry movements. So we recognise, and we've had this in place for over 6 months, that with the complexities of ensuring that Australia keeps moving while we see individual border closures and border controls, that we created, or a national code was created for the freight industry. That enables particularly interstate movements of freight to happen under certain conditions, but also with certain obligations on the employers and obligations on the individuals that travel under that freight code. Those obligations include testing at least every 7 days. It also includes regarding your time in this state as being under isolation. So freight drivers who come in particularly from New South Wales under the national code have to get tested every 7 days, cannot leave their vehicle whilst they're within Victoria, and in the event they need to go and get fuel and get hold of food, they must mask, use sanitation and do all those other distancing protocols and remain in their vehicle at night. So there are tight restrictions in place to manage all of that. We met again with all the national freight providers and peak bodies again this morning. We've got a number of other industry conversations happening again this afternoon to highlight and underscore to all industry the importance of maintaining with those COVID safe protocols when we allow people to travel under those limited conditions. Sorry, Rich.
Did this removalist company have a permit and 2 abide by those guidelines, those national set of rules?
So my understanding is that they applied for a permit. Again, we're seeking to validate the nature of their business and exactly the way that they travelled, and to your point, Richard, as to whether they complied with those restrictions contained within that permit. So I've just gone through what you have to do when you seek a freight exemption permit or a special exemption permit. So we'll be very keen to ensure with them that they did just that.
Do you know whether they did stay in the...
I'll go to Rich, I'll go to Samaya, and I'll come to you.
Is it a bit concerning that you don't actually know where they stayed and where they were in the community? I know obviously it's complicated, you've alluded to that.
Yep.
But is information not as free-flowing?
Look, it is, of course it's concerning. This is, as I said, this is the 3rd incursion of a known COVID positive case into our state. As we've been with the previous 2 and as we'll be with these 2, we want to be right on top of these and get as much information as quick as we can. I want to get accurate information out to the Victorian community because we will then want to drive that, follow it through with the appropriate testing and other protocols. We've got the families identified, so I'm pleased we've got those supported and well supported. Sorry?
Were they home when the delivery picked up
Yes, they were. So both families or both households were home when those deliveries were taking place. But obviously, I'm concerned that the information hasn't been as crisp and clear, as consistent as I would have wanted it to be. Admittedly, we are 5 or 6 hours into this investigation, so the day is still young, and we'll go at this all night long if we have to get the information we need so we can get this under control. Samaya and then Rachel.
So just on these two particular families, have you been able to contact their secondary contacts yet?
Those conversations are happening now, Samaya. So we've picked up first contact with the first family late last night, and obviously we're working with them to identify their wider networks. Similar with the second household. Of course, those test results we'll get later on this afternoon will be very important because they'll also establish if they're positive, whether they've gone much further. We know with the first, or at least I know for the first household, they are new arrivals into our state. They've had very, very limited exposure out in the community. They've literally just arrived. And of course, we have that negative test going back to the 9th of July. So if they are positive, it'll be a very short window, and we know their movements and they're pretty limited. So we are in reasonable shape on that one. One follow-up, and I'll go to Rachel. Sorry, Rachel.
And the family in the city of Hume, the family of 4.
Yeah.
Do you know, have you been able to contact their secondary contact, their primary contacts? And have you been able to determine, I guess, if they have any exposure sites, one person travels by car?
Yeah, and that's exactly what we're going through now. So we're in contact with all those 4 individuals, obviously making sure that we get 2 of them tested. We're having all those conversations now about whether there's been anybody has anybody been to them to the house, whether they've been outside at all. We know they've made testing journeys, whether they've done anything else in those testing journeys. So those are all the conversations we'll have. And look, and again, let me stress, we ask an awful lot of people who are doing these red zone applications, who are returning, and we ask a lot of them because it's so important, because we regard them as potentially positive, that they don't risk the wider community. So we do expect them to be isolating at home. We do expect them not to be going out and doing various bits and pieces, and we will work with this family to ensure that that's been the case, and if not, that we'll manage those exposure sites appropriately. Rachel, you've been very patient.
Just in terms of the 2 families who have who were involved in the removals, where did the family who are now in Victoria come from, and where did the family who left Victoria move to?
Right. So the first family moved into state and arrived in Victoria on the 6th. They did not arrive from New South Wales, but I won't go any further than that. But they arrived into state, and we're very pleased to see them here in Victoria. The second family is still in Victoria. They left their premises in Maribyrnong. They were in temporary accommodation elsewhere, pending a longer-term move. We're working with them at the moment. They will probably go into hotel quarantine for the rest of their infectious period.
And how many people in both of those families?
So there are if I go to the Removalist, there are 4 members of the household at the first address. I believe there are 4 members of the household at the second address. And with regard to the family that's come into the city of Hume, there are 4 members of the household there as well.
And they have 2 parents, 2 kids?
Of differing ages, but broadly, yes.
And do any of them work in vulnerable settings, whether it's hospital-aged care?
So not at this time, or we've not identified any linkages at this point in time. Again, let me highlight the importance of the red zone restrictions we put in place, because the people who, certainly the City of Hume family, who arrived into a red zone environment and we believe have been playing along or adopting those principles of isolating, we do not think they've got any workplace exposures at this point in time. Obviously, as we continue our conversations with them, we'll want to make sure we validate that understanding.
No risk then?
Look, clearly it represents a risk. So when you're in an environment, and this is a risk we manage, and this is why, with 8,000 or so red zone arrivals, this is a risk that we as all Victorians are managing in order to enable people to come home from interstate, and it's entirely the appropriate thing to do. But they represent some risk because they've arrived here, and they've clearly, at least 2 of their members have become infectious. If they've maintained their full isolation, haven't been outside at all, have had no contact with anybody, then that would be a very good outcome, and that would represent a very low risk and no exposure sites. If as it transpires they've been out and doing other things, they will manage this as we would any other exposure site for a positive case with a community outbreak.
And the 10 people that have tested positive out of that Hume family, they obviously travelled by road, they didn't come on a plane, so there's no, or did one of them come on a plane?
No, so the Hume family, or the Hume household, so 3 of them returned to Victoria by plane from Sydney on the 4th. 1 of them arrived by road, by car, on the 8th. Again, we're working with him to understand the exact nature of the journey that he made.
So one of them came on the plane?
3 of them came on the plane, 1 came by car.
But one of the positive must have come.
That's right. That's right.
And so what flight was that?
So we're not going to identify that flight because the one of the positive cases, you're right, did arrive by plane. So 3 people travelled by plane. They arrived on the 4th. They all tested negative on the 6th. So we are confident that they were not infectious on the plane. There's a second test of one of them on the 11th that turned positive.
Do you think there's no need to test that plane just?
Correct. That's right. Look, and bear in mind, everybody who was on that plane, given it was a Sydney arrival flight, would have been a red zone contact already. So all those people are already red zone people. They're already undertaking their isolation. They'll be going through their own protocol. So look, and again, it's very early days. I mean, this is less than 3 or 4 hours in. So we're obviously working through the narrative and the epi in terms of how that's evolved through this particular household and how it's moved around. The information I have at this point in time, given their negative testing history when they arrived, is I'm not concerned about the flight in terms of any exposure risk they represented. Not also because, of course, everybody who's on that flight would have been a red zone arrival.
Will everyone on that flight, sorry, just on that point, will everybody on that flight be notified, including the crew?
Not necessarily, Rich, because if these individuals have returned a negative test result 2 days after getting off that plane, they don't represent an infectious risk on that plane.
Couldn't they report it on the plane from someone else though?
Look, again, we're following through the connections with the. Bear in mind, you've got another member of the family returning interstate on the 8th. We'll work through the chain of events and what's happened. I'm very confident we've got the controls in place, as we do with this family. That's why the red zone system is there to do. It's there to provide everybody who comes out of Sydney at this point in time, now New South Wales, isolates for 14 days. That's a good thing they need to do.
Sorry.
If that person was driving.
Hang on, you going to jump on that one?
We can just finish up on
Okay,
this.
right.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's one of those controls to go through those permits to make sure those people that came off that plane, that they are going and getting tested.
Sure. Look, and look, we're following up with everybody who arrives on a red zone permit. So, you know, we're very focused on this. 744 people arriving in yesterday with red zone permits. We're sending SMS messages. We're phoning people. We're checking to see their negative test results are coming through. We're seeing consistently as we go through 400 home visits made yesterday, 385 to red zone arrivals. We're seeing consistently, you know, at least 80% of people returning those negative test results. We continue to follow up the remainder that don't do that. So we will absolutely, you know, follow. We are very focused on these 2 incursion events we've seen. We will be following up anybody who's had any potential contact with these cases. But remember, we've all got another 8,000 people out there who've emerged. And this is why we've taken the measures we have over the last 3 weeks, starting with the orange zone definition, the red zone definition for Sydney on the 25th of June, and of course the Cho's decision yesterday to move all of New South Wales to red zone.
Were the crew of Removalists interviewed by Victoria Health?
So the crew of the Removalists were initially interviewed by New South Wales Health, one of their public health teams, that's since been taken over by some of our teams here.
So have we interviewed all
Yes,
3?
we are interviewing them as we speak.
Do you know which suburb the Removalists are from? And do you also know, because they were obviously one of the close contacts of a positive case,
Yep.
do you know if there are any delays by New South Wales Health in contacting the Removalists?
I don't know what suburb they're from in Sydney. Sydney geography is not one of my special strengths, and I'm not aware of what the genealogy or the timing has been on the New South Wales Health. So how long it took between the positive case identified and the connection to one of the removalists, I don't have that information. I also don't have the information about how long it took for their test results to come through and when they notified us. What I do know is they notified us late last night that we had a positive case, or one of their positive cases had travelled through the state. You know, since then we've been able to build this kind of picture. Obviously we're driving at more information to be very specific about any exposure sites.
And do you know when New South Wales actually found out about the Removalists?
I don't have that information either, Samaya. So all I know is that when they told us, which was late last night, I would hope that was fairly late last night and they went straight to us.
What's the removal company?
I do have that information with me.
Are they one of the big sort of chains, or are they a little private operator?
Don't have it with me.
Do we know what dates the Whittlesea and the Maribyrnong families actually had contact with them? Was one on Thursday, one on Friday?
No, so both those contacts were on the 8th of July. As I understand it, as the lineup that we have at the moment, and bear in mind this is still relatively early in the day, and one of the things we see with these is sometimes the details shift around a bit. At this point in time, my understanding is the first drop-off on the 8th at the City of Whittlesea address, and then the second pick-up at Maribyrnong also on the 8th, and then the crew departed to head towards Adelaide, arriving there in the early hours of the 9th.
Did they have a proper permit?
Sorry?
Did they have a proper permit to be in Victoria?
So the crew?
Yeah,
So as I said earlier, the removalist firm applied for a permit on behalf of its crew, and we're following through with them at the moment. It's frankly not the most important thing we're doing now, but it is something we're checking into as to whether that permit was appropriate for the uses in which they put it to.
You got concerned that they didn't follow the rules?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've got a number of concerns here. Look, the most important thing in this case is we've always, with the red zone permit system that we've put in place, with the border controls that we have in place, even with the special freight, the national freight code for the freight industry and the various other controls and issues we have, we're all here trying to manage risk, and we know that there's a balance to be struck between enabling critical movement, essential movement over the border, and managing risk of incursions from New South Wales at this point in time. So therefore, we need to be ready to pick up these ones. I'm not surprised that we're seeing some flying embers coming in from New South Wales. We've had 2 in the last 10 days. We've got another 2 here today. We will manage both of them accordingly. I'm concerned. The concerns at this point are around getting a full and clear understanding of the movements of this crew in our state. The company concerned, I think, is now starting to become helpful, so we'll get as much information as we can out of them to validate the story and to get any of those exposure sites up and running. And secondly, we'll obviously want to make sure that whatever activity they undertook was consistent with what the permit system is designed to do.
So just permits, are they approved immediately, or does someone have to physically look at them and check them off?
No, so the way that the freight permits operate, and the freight permits are essentially an agreement between a recognised freight operator and firm outfit and their staff and their operators to conduct themselves in a certain way and to undertake a series of obligations, regular testing, not essentially isolating while you're here within your vehicle, not making any unnecessary contact. Yes, picking up fuel. If you need to get some food, you can get some food, but under very strict protocols. We will obviously, the most important thing for us is let's get the exposure sites, let's work with those, and then we'll work back and say, will all those requirements properly complied with?
So you said there's a chance that they applied for a permit. Do we know whether that was actually approved?
So I've not personally seen the permit that they applied for. My understanding is that a permit was applied for. As I said just now, it's a secondary part of our follow-up. The most important thing for us is to get after the information about where they actually were and what they actually did, and then we'll work back and see whether the permit they applied for and the behaviour that they conducted in was appropriate to that.
If that permit wasn't approved, what are the penalties?
I will come back to you on that.
How far off are we from hearing about some exposure sites? You'd imagine they didn't only stop at those 2 houses and stay in their cabin. How long do you think it's going to be?
Well, I would expect that to be during the course of this afternoon. So we've decided, made a conscious decision to come out as soon as we possibly could to say this is the information we have. We've got 2 incursions, 2 quite separate and distinct incursions, both under some form of control. One within a recognised freight permit system and freight industry system, one within a red zone control system. But there will obviously, for both of them, I'm expecting more information to emerge in the coming hours. As soon as we have, and as you guys have been very focused on, accurate and effective information to communicate to the public, we'll get out there with it.
And at this stage, the family in the city of Hume, all indications are they were abiding by their 14-day quarantine period they had to stay.
Absolutely, yeah. At this point in time, look, if I look at the facts in front of me at this point in time, I've got people making a return trip into Sydney, so Victorians coming back from interstate, in both by flight, both by road, both carrying appropriate permits to do so, both returning negative test results within a couple of days of arriving. That's fantastic. And both getting tested as soon as they became symptomatic. So the 2 individuals chose to get tested yesterday because they became symptomatic. That's exactly the kind of behaviour we want to see. Obviously, the work of our public health teams now is to work with those individuals to see what else may have happened. And I stress again, as we do with every single time with these things, at this point in time, when you have a positive case, nothing matters apart from what they've done and understanding and getting an accurate, swift build-up of that picture so we can act upon it. Sumaya, Harmridge.
That Hume family, were they primary close contact with confirmed case? Did they visit an exposure site?
Which one's this, sorry?
The Hume family?
The Hume family, no, they came back from Sydney, is my understanding. They're not.
As in, were they at an exposure site in Sydney, or were they the primary close contact?
No, certainly not to my knowledge. I've got no evidence that they were primary close contacts. I have no knowledge of their movements. Remember, we declared Sydney a red zone on the 25th of June. They travelled back on the 4th and 8th of July. So therefore, just by the fact they came out of Sydney meant that they should have been coming on a red zone permit.
And will you be investigating where they were in Sydney?
Yeah, when the time is right to do so. No, the issue I have at the moment is I have 2 people who have got COVID, who are ill. I want to make sure that they're healthy and that they're well and they're being supported. And I want to understand any potential contact they may have had outside of the house. As soon as we've got that, then I'm happy. So Maya, then Richard.
And all of these cases and the close contacts, Have any of them been vaccinated, and are any of them seriously unwell?
Don't know. So certainly my understanding is that none of these individuals are they're not in hospital at this point, so they're not seriously unwell. Obviously, we hope that remains away. I don't have any knowledge of their vaccination status at this point. Rich, you've been very patient.
Just a technical question. When someone's in a red zone permit situation,
Yep.
does someone come to them for testing, or do they go?
No, no. So if you're a red zone, as you know, the vast majority of our red zone permit holders do, we ask you to go and get tested. The vast majority of people do that, of course, by and we've discussed this before at one of these meetings. Vast majority of people do that by using one of the drive-up facilities, or they isolate carefully and use other facilities in the community. Over 200 testing stations available for those people for whom that is a challenge. If you feel, if you're a red zone permit holder, just as it is if you're a primary close contact of a positive case, if you don't feel you can test safely or effectively, then talk to us. And I think that's my biggest call out today is, we here in Victoria have had a pretty decent run on the back of the outbreak we've had to deal with in the last few weeks. We've seen those cases come right down. We've had 12, 13 days of no positive cases in the community. That's really encouraging. In order to sustain that, we've got to maintain these good behaviours. So the fact that our red zone permit system is working in the sense that it's identifying these people when they're in isolation is encouraging. I'd rather, of course, they weren't positive at all. And the fact that people are getting tested is so important, and we've got to maintain those behaviours. So if you need help to get tested, give us a call. Let us know how we can help, because it's more important that you get tested safely than anything else.
Just on another matter, I'm told that Christmas Island, Norfolk Island and the Cocos Islands have gone from green to red as far as Victoria is concerned today. It appears that might be an administrative thing due to them having twos in front of their postcodes. Are you able to shed any light on that?
I thought you were listing out my holiday destinations, Rachel, so I'm afraid I don't know. Let me take that on notice and come back to you.
Do red zone returnees, their household contacts have to isolate with them? So for example,
Yes.
if someone's moving
Yes.
from Sydney back to Melbourne,
Yep.
do those household contacts...
Yeah, look, so in the scenario we've got here with the City of Hume household, they all travelled together. So they were all in Sydney, they all came back together. Is that
I'm talking about people that didn't travel to Sydney.
right?
For example, if one member of the family
Yep.
comes back from Sydney and then moves in with their family,
Sure.
again, does the whole family...
Yeah, so look, I think there's two scenarios on that. So if you've got an individual coming back into a household and the individual's travelled and the rest of the household hasn't, there are two scenarios. If you have a setup in your house whereby you can achieve full isolation for that individual, and there are households who've been able to do that in the past, then that's great. But you have to ensure that person's completely segregated from the rest of the house, particularly in terms of washing, eating, and obviously sleeping and living quarters. So that's a really important distinction to make. If they're going to become part of the family and be part of the normal movement in the house, then that entire household has to isolate for at least 14 days and go through that testing protocol.
And can I just clarify, which of these COVID cases are recorded in our figures? Just the two?
So at this point in time, none of them are tested. So obviously the numbers were reported this morning. We in Vic have a very early reporting cycle. We report up to midnight of last night. At this point, I have two positive cases on the books that are the two returning red zone travellers. So they will be in our numbers tomorrow. I believe that the crew member, the removalist, is likely to turn up in New South Wales's numbers tomorrow, I suspect. But yeah, the two positives are ours, and of course we're very concerned about the exposure that the crew had.
Do you have updates on how many people came through on red zone permit from the time you announced border closing?
All I've got at the moment is 8,000 or so red zone, or 8,019 red zone permits. As at this morning, 744 came through yesterday. So that's fairly consistent, I think. Look, and the numbers we've been seeing, the numbers I've been reporting over the last week or so, we've been seeing on average 200, 300 or so people a day returning out of the Sydney red zone. The fact we're seeing 740 odd coming in yesterday will be consistent with a higher number as we are now encompassing the wider areas of New South Wales.
Every day in New South Wales, they've recorded at least more than a dozen cases that haven't been linked to known outbreaks that are still, under investigation. It's considerably higher than what they were recording around the Crossroads and also the Avalon cluster. Do you have any concerns about that?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think all of us, all of us as Australians and as Eastern Seaboard residents should all have that concern. I mean, as I said a few days ago, this is the Sydney cluster, the Greater Sydney cluster, is now the second biggest outbreak we've seen in Australia after the Vic second wave. Anything of that scale has obvious concerns and ramifications for all of us, and that's why we made the decisions we did, or the Cho made the decisions he did to shut the border. So.
I just find it more in terms of your the AHPPT meetings. Has the New South Wales medical experts and the Cho been able to allay some of your fears and your concerns around those unlinked cases?
No, look, I think certainly the acting chief health officer was on the HPPC call again today, as he is every day. He remains exceptionally concerned, as I think do all the chief health officers around the country, as of course do our colleagues in New South Wales Public Health, at the scale of what they're dealing with at this point in time. This is still, from what we can see and what we're seeing through HPPC, a very dynamic and active moving cluster. The numbers are significant. I think I would just say, and I think Dr. Chant made a very important comment today around, obviously you want to see all these cases being pulled out of the weeds. I mean, you want to make sure you've got all the cases on the table so you can go and deal with them. So the higher they get their testing numbers, the more cases they get into visibility, and the more of those cases that are coming to them that are in isolation, the more confident we will all feel.
And what assistance has Victoria offered New South Wales, and is there anything that they've taken us up on?
So I think certainly through HPPC we've offered consistently and repeatedly support to our colleagues in New South Wales, as we do to every other state and as other states do to us when we go through these dramas. I mean, this is something that every state has had a share of. Obviously, New South Wales has got a really challenging one on its hands at this point in time. So we've offered through HPPC, we've offered through our contacts with the New South Wales Secretary, and I think the Premier's made similar statements to that effect. We remain ready to stand by and to offer help. At this point in time, no explicit help's been pulled up, but we continue to be available to do that.
Do you get access to this person's phone?
You've moved.
Do you get access to their phones and whether they've checked in or not? How does that?
Yeah, so look, we get access to, where am I? We're in the early hours here. So I mean, again, what we're keen to highlight today is we want to share with the Victorian community and with yourselves, as much information we have as early as we have it, and you'll appreciate our hope that as a result things are a little bit raw and not always as polished as we might like them to be. In terms of access to phones, we do not get access to your phone within the first half an hour of an interview by just saying thank you very much indeed, we'll take that, and we'll go and work out where you've been. There is a discussion, we build an understanding of what people's movements have been, we ask for evidence and for any other corroboration that people can provide to that effect. Where necessary, we will ask people for full access to their phone to get their movements, and if that's not consented to and not agreed to, then we have to go down a bit of another process. So we will ask for that. But you'll recognise, particularly we've got some specific challenges with these conversations. We understand that the individuals concerned are not feeling particularly positive about being where they're at, and they're concerned and under pressure. So we will work with them to get information as swiftly as we can and as confident as we can.
And do we have any detail on when that removalist crew actually left Sydney as to how long it took them to get to Melbourne?
Yeah, I don't. Again, I'd love to have that detailed timeline, and that's what we will get eventually. I think at this point in time, we know they arrived into Melbourne, I believe, around 12:30 on the 8th. Their exact route into Melbourne, what route they took from Sydney, where they stopped along the way, we don't know. If I look at their movements overall, so Melbourne to Sydney to Adelaide and back to Sydney, all in the space of 2 days is a pretty fair go. So I don't think they would have stopped extensively. I don't think they did any sightseeing while they were here. Obviously my hope at this point would be that we have a very small number of stops done within the context of the restrictions we have on the Freight National Code.
I just wanted to confirm, so then they didn't get to South Australia though until the night?
Correct.
So there has been an overnight in
That's right, there's an overnight. And again, my understanding at this point is that the overnighting was done within the vehicle. Again, that's something we'll be keen to follow up on.
And we're confident that these cases are linked to Sydney's current
Yeah.
Delta outbreak?
Yeah, like I mean, again, existing information at this point, Samaya, so things may always evolve, but given that one of these individuals, the one who first went positive, was a primary close contact of a case in New South Wales, is a pretty strong establishment. That's where all the evidence is pointing to.
The Delta outbreak was
Correct.
discovered